According to St. Matthew, the 2nd chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising, and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. The Gospel of the Lord. So, modern, efficient LED lighting is a wonderful thing. It lasts longer than old incandescent halogen and all those kind of halogen and incandescent light bulbs. It uses dramatically less power, and it costs less money. And usually, you can change the color of the lights to suit the needs of your room, which has been wonderful for me, so I can set the color different in my shop, from in my den, and places like that. I love the LED lights. But more and more, as I've upgraded the lighting in my house, the LED bulbs are built into the fixtures, or the LED lights are built into the fixtures. There are no more replaceable light bulbs. And so even though I still have a few fixtures that take light bulbs which look like the old incandescent bulbs, they're all LED, and it's hard to remember when I last had to buy a new pack of LED light bulbs. Each year around this time of year, as the new year starts, people publish these lists in the paper of things that are supposedly in and things that are going out in the new year. And you know what? Light bulbs, which were once ubiquitous things in our lives, are clearly heading out, even the LED ones. And yet, unlike rotary phones, they still sometimes get depicted in cartoons when a character gets a bright idea. When a character has been confused, uncertain, or generally in the dark, and an idea or a solution or a revelation comes to the character, suddenly there is this bright, shining light bulb over the character's head to indicate that the sign that they now have got it. They've now figured it all out. I don't know what's eventually going to replace the light bulb for this image, but maybe the reason that it's still used is that it's great to imagine that when we are confused or stumped or generally in the dark about something, suddenly, like a light bulb going on, an idea will come to us. And when that light goes on, everything will suddenly make sense, everything will become clear. Kind of like what happens when you switch a light bulb on. Honestly, there have been a few times in my life, and maybe in yours, when I was really stumped about something, but then somebody explained it to me in a way that finally made sense. And then it felt like I understood completely, and my problem was solved. It was like a light bulb coming on. But that is not the norm in my life, and probably not in yours either. Usually, when I am in need of enlightenment with something important, it takes a while. It takes effort. And it usually takes more than one person explaining something to me. It is not like a light bulb suddenly being switched on. And I share all of this today because we begin the season of Epiphany today. Epiphany is a Greek word which means enlightenment, or revelation, or manifestation. At Christmas, we celebrate the light of God coming into the world in Jesus. And during the weeks of Epiphany, we remember how people came to have that light revealed to them. And sometimes we imagine that this happened for people in one quick moment, just like a light bulb being turned on. But actually, that's not how it was for most folks. Take, for example, the initial story of the Epiphany, today's story of these magi who follow a star to find Jesus. There is indeed a light that suddenly appears over their head, the light of a distant star. But even that light apparently is not big or bold or even noticeable to most people, because if it were, when they finally reached Jerusalem and told their story, everybody would have said, that's what that big bright star is all about. But nobody had really noticed it. Moreover, for the Magi to even be able to begin experiencing Jesus in their lives, and even to begin to understand what the revelation of Jesus meant to them, they had to invest themselves in a journey. Somehow they noticed that this new light in the sky was up there, and they assumed that it meant somebody important had been born. We call them magi because in Greek they are called magi, magoi, and it's the Greek word from which we get the English word magician. These guys were astrologers. They were not like, deeply wise people that we like them to think they are, but they studied stars, and so they would notice this little itty-bitty star in the sky, and they said, aha, this must mean something. But to find out who and what it meant, they needed to travel from the east, which was not easy in those days. It required effort, risking danger, and a fair amount of cost, not including the gold, frankincense, and myrrh that they brought to Jesus. This was not an easy thing to do, but they needed to commit to a journey in order to finally find the revelation. They also had to spend a lot of time, because this journey took maybe as much as 2 years from the time that they first saw the star. It was not a day trip. And during those years, as they traveled along, it probably didn't feel to the Magi like they were getting any more enlightened. Instead, they probably just had to some days just keep plugging along until they got to where they thought they needed to be. And for those Magi also, in order to experience Jesus in their lives, they couldn't just follow the star. They actually needed to talk to other people. Sometimes we get focused on the star. But for reasons that Matthew does not make clear, when the Magi arrived in Jerusalem, they needed to actually ask for directions from Herod and his court. Where is this new king? Now, personally, I would like to ask Matthew why they needed to do this, because if the star could help them geolocate the exact position of the house where Jesus was, how come they couldn't find Bethlehem, which is pretty close by also? But somehow, the conversations they have, even with morally questionable people like Herod and his court, provide the help they need to finally find Jesus. And I think there's a point that Matthew's trying to make with this detail. And the thing is, even after they find Jesus and they offer their gifts, I don't think the light bulb was fully on. They still needed to watch what happened after Jesus grew up and to reflect on their own experiences, because even at that moment when they find Jesus and they say, okay, now we found Jesus, suddenly the angel appears to them in a dream and says, in Matthew's gospel, nobody gets any sleep because the angel is always appearing to somebody in a dream and waking them up, and says, don't go back to Herod, find a different route home. And they realize that there's something more going on here than they thought. And even then, they don't know what it's all about. So their experience is actually like others in the Bible who later meet Jesus. Most, if not all, don't have light bulb experiences, even if in a couple of cases they may claim to. Instead, most people who meet Jesus and want to live fully into God's revelation and purposes for their lives need to do what the Magi did. And those are the same things that we often have to do if we want to live into God's self-revelation in our lives as well. That is, rather than expecting or hoping for a light bulb moment, we also have to be people who invest ourselves in a journey. For us too, there may be stars. That is, an idea or a feeling or a suggestion in our hearts that God is pointing us in a particular direction. But to figure out what that means being willing to invest ourselves in exploration that may involve a physical journey, or study and prayer, or perhaps just trying out a whole bunch of things to see if it feels like this is what God is calling you to do, or the direction God is calling you to move in. And if you're at all like me, I would just like to be told what to do and where to find the answers, to be done with it and move on. But what I've learned over my life is that God is often leading me and you on journeys that simply take time, and there are no shortcuts where you would like to find them and where you would like them to be. For us too, if we want to live into God's self-revelation in our lives, we've got to be people who are willing to spend the time necessary for that journey. And recently, I have been unfortunately reminded of the importance of doing daily back exercises. Stretch. And when I've had issues before, I have been told that when you do these exercises daily, over a long period of time, they work. And they do. But when you don't invest the time, you feel it. And the same can be often true of experiencing God in our lives. It often just can't happen if you look for God only once in a while, when you're not busy. Usually, you can't just flip it on like a light bulb. You've got to actually take time to commit the time to the journey. And for us too, really living into God's self-revelation in our lives often means having conversations with other people, talking to other people, because one of the dangers of today's story is that people read it and they think, oh, I'll just look for those stars in my life, someplace up there, being God all by ourselves. But the Magi had to have conversations with others to figure it all out, and the same is true for us. Even the Magi had to talk to others, and God worked in their lives through those conversations, even if not the way that Herod thought they would work. We often need each other to help us figure out where God is leading us, even at those moments where we think we've got it figured out, we're pretty sure. It is still often helpful to have those conversations. I still remember decades ago I was sitting having lunch with then Bishop Schneider, and the two of us were talking about things, and I was feeling like I needed to move in a different direction in my life, and I started to tell him about how I had prayed about this and thought about this and worked this all through, and he just sat back there and he's smiling and sitting like the cat swallowed the canary, and I stopped and I said, what? He says, oh yeah, I've known this for years. I was just waiting for you to figure it out. But those kinds of conversations are often the ones that say, yeah, this is the direction you got to go in. And you need to have those conversations with people when you're struggling with which direction God is calling you to go in your life. That often is the way it works for us too. So today, we begin a season of Epiphany stories. But the stories we read are almost always, watch for this, not the sudden and total illumination of a light bulb being switched on. Rather, they're stories of how God is present in our world even when we don't realize it, and in fact, in ways that we don't expect. And people, both then and now, come to experience the presence of Jesus in their lives and in the lives of others as they invest themselves in the journey to which Jesus calls them, and as they spend their time watching and listening and wondering, and as they enter into conversations and relationships with others that God uses to guide them to the next steps and into a deeper relationship with God and with each other.